So we're here today with Secretary Crowfoot on a conversation on embedding equity. You just recently released a blog where you were titled Climate Change, Communities and Culture, Why Uplifting People is at the Heart of Climate Change. Tell us more about what this means to you and how is this a part of your work?
Well, I think we've been on a journey in the last several years, really understanding that the environmental work we do, the work to combat climate change, has to be centered around equity. And by that, we have to protect our most vulnerable communities. We have to recognize that a lot of our policies in the past have perpetuated inequity. And we need to make sure we're taking care of our environment and a planet in a way that lifts all people, particularly those that have been marginalized in the past.
Well, that's excellent. So you have taken some bold actions since you got here. You're now in your 5th year. And in those 5 years, you've established 3 key executive positions focused on strengthening partnerships with tribes, advancing environmental justice, and also expanding access to our natural and cultural resources. Why has this been important to you?
Well, I talk about, me personally, but also our agency being on a journey. And the first step in the journey is to listen and learn. To understand where we as people, but also institutions, have perpetuated inequity. And after listening and learning, it's acknowledging where we've fallen short. And then it's acting. And that's really where I'm so proud of our progress, thanks to you and so many others. It's really important from my perspective at our big agency to have executive level leadership driving these priorities. So it's one thing, it's important for me to champion this, but we needed to bring in leaders to advance our equity and environmental justice agenda. That's your role, to address our strengthening partnerships with tribes and all of our tribal affairs work, and that's our colleague Geneva E.B. Thompson's role. And then lastly, to address one element of equity in this sector, which is providing everybody an opportunity to get outdoors and enjoy nature. And that's where our colleague Catherine Toy does her work as a Deputy Secretary for Access.
And why is this important now? Why now? Why not before?
Well, it's a great question. I think that there are a variety of factors, including the murder of George Floyd in 2020 and the continued instances of police brutality. I think that, there's so many ways that people in power have been made to pay attention and to actually take action. So from my perspective, we're at a moment of reckoning, and in California we have a role to play. We're a place that is among the most culturally diverse places in the world, a place where we celebrate our diversity. But our challenge is that, okay, that's great, but then actually how do we embed these values in the work that we do?
On that note, on the discrimination of people of color and low-income communities, there's been redlining practices, there's been vast disinvestment. What are some concrete examples of where you are making strides or the agency is making strides in this work?
Well, one clear area is regarding the extraction of fossil fuels. In California, oil drilling takes place and has taken place within and around poorer communities, disadvantaged communities, and disproportionately communities of color. And we've had to recognize that and do something about it. So our governor and our legislature passed a law, currently being challenged, that would prohibit drilling within a buffer zone of schools and homes and places where community members live. That's one example. Another example is where we've shifted our investments in energy resilience to ensure that communities most vulnerable to energy impacts actually have ways to become resilient to those impacts.
Oh, this is excellent. You're talking on 2 different topics here, which also leads me to really think about breaking down silos, right? And when we're really thinking about advancing environmental justice, we really must work outside of our own little agency bubbles. So, talk about your work with your colleagues in other agencies. Cumulative environmental injustices really demand that we're working with our agency partners. Tell us how you're currently doing this and what are you like to see more of?
Yeah, well, large organizations, certainly government, tend to divide labor in very intense ways and have silos. And while these distinctions are important to us in government, they really don't mean a whole lot to people out in the real world. That it's, at the end of the day, it's how people are being impacted. It's where government is benefiting them, and it's not broken down by agency. So we need to recognize that, and we need to recognize that our individual agency actions collectively impact people, and so therefore we have to work across agencies. So that includes agency to agency partnerships. We're doing a lot of work, interesting work with our transportation colleagues to balance environmental impacts and transportation development. We're doing great partnership with Cal EPA, our sister environmental agency, recognizing that some of the historic impacts that natural resource extraction has had also impact our air quality and water quality, which EPA regulates. Writ large, Governor Newsom has brought us together around or within what we call a climate cabinet. So secretaries of a variety of agencies, housing, health, transportation, economic development, we're all together, and we're actually forming policies together to work to break down those silos that have limited our progress in the past.
You brought up the governor bringing y'all together, and he also just recently signed an executive order calling to embed equity in all that we do. What does that mean to you years from now?
Well, I think it's going to be among the most significant work that we do. I've had a chance to know Gavin Newsom for over 2 decades, and this is personal to him. We talk about the guiding value of our administration being California for all, and that's a guiding value publicly, but also privately. And so one of his primary goals is how do we leave these institutions more equitable, more just than we left them? So the executive order is really working to institutionalize and standardize that commitment across agencies. And it's hard. And I think the work that you do and that I do, a lot of us do, is to figure out, how do we shift the way that we do our work, whether it's investments or programs or access and outreach, and really, retrain our muscles to do it more effectively to lift up equity. So, I'm hopeful that whenever I leave this role, I leave an institution that is much more centered around equity and justice than it has been in the past.
That legacy is extremely important, and to a legacy of embedding equity, and that's extremely important to our youth.
Yeah.
Right? It's extremely important to the youth that are looking at leaders like yourself as role models. So is there a message that you want to tell our Californians, our young Californians, about how they could be involved and what they could be doing?
Well, I'd first, thank our youth leaders because they hold us accountable. And a lot of the reason why we've prioritized these values is because they've demanded that we do that. And if you look at cultural change, over time, it's really youth movements, student movements that have driven a lot of that positive cultural change. So I would say, stay engaged and hold people like me, elected officials as well, accountable. But then I'd also say, consider a career in government and public service. Government is such a force for good, and I'm hopeful that a lot of these youth leaders that bring that energy, bring that commitment and passion, ultimately become leaders in these agencies, in these institutions in the future. Moy, before we end, I want to turn the tables on you, and first of all, thank you for your incredible leadership. We are making such progress institutionalizing equity and justice, diversity and inclusion, thanks to your commitment over the last couple of years. You are also transitioning from this role to become the Deputy Secretary for Environmental Justice, Tribal Affairs, and Border Relations at our sister agency, Cal EPA. And of course, we're really excited for you in that role. So let me ask you a question. What are opportunities for our two agencies, Cal EPA and the Natural Resources Agency, to partner on these very priorities?
That's a great question, Secretary. And our colleagues at Cal EPA have given this a lot of thought on how we break down silos on programmatic areas like drought, right? When we're talking about human right to water, there's elements in our agency, and there's already great work that's happening there. Also, Salton Sea, right? Whenever we go to meetings, we get questions about the Air Board, and we get questions about OEHA, right? So how are we connecting those thoughts with the Salton Sea Management Program, where we're talking about extreme heat, right? How the air quality issues around extreme heat are also areas where we're talking about our Outdoors for All initiative and the intersections of those things. So there's a lot of opportunities here where we could break down those silos. We now have teams here within CNRA, within our departments that are very eager. We, thanks to your leadership, we have designees on equity and environmental justice across our departments that we could tap into. Wow. And that we could really, really, work with.
Yeah.
And all of that is in our brand new environmental justice website for CNRA. And it's all there, right? We have those lists of people, and there's folks around Cali, PA that would be eager. In fact, I have a follow-up conversation to meet all of the CARB environmental justice leads and introduce them to our agency as part of what you're doing, bringing in the board chair of the CARB board chair. I'm doing the same, but with the environmental justice teams.
That's amazing.
So there's a lot of integration that we could be doing, and I want to just see more of it, like you want to embed more of it in your work.
Absolutely. I'll finally say, we've made great progress that we can be proud of, but we have so much work ahead of us. And I have to say, Moy, I'm really excited to continue to partner on this work across government, because this will really be one of the most important things we do in our career.
I agree, and I'm just very thankful to you, to your leadership, and all of the support that you've given me and our departments to truly make embedding equity not yet another thing we do, but part of what we do. So, gracias. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you.